All right. We have just finished section one. Now it's time for section two of the FAR bar, residential contract for sale and purchase, version six, right? 6X. So, Mark, let's dive into this starting with line 27.
Okay, so purchase price should be relatively simple. That is obviously the amount that you're going to, if you're the buyer's agent, you're going to offer. Now, with today's world of technology, we don't really have a problem reading the purchase price, but back in the day when people used to fax, you'd submit an offer, the list or the buyer agent would send it to the buyer. They'd sign it, they'd fax it back to the buyer's agent, who would then fax it to the listing agent, who'd fax it to the seller, who'd fax it back, and so forth and so on. So in the past, we used to have problems being able to read what was the actual purchase price. So if you have a situation where maybe dealing with an elderly seller and you can't use DocuSign or something like that, just make sure as the buyer's agent, when you receive it back, it is crystal clear what was agreed on the purchase price.
There we go. So legibility is good. Penmanship. All right. Do you prefer to see like .00?
I always prefer to see numbers.
All right.
Yeah, whether you put the .00
doesn't matter.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Because I see some people that will do 500, 000 dot zero. I'm like that .0 because nobody's expecting change on it.
Right.
Unless there's change. Okay. So we come to line 28. Initial deposit to be held in escrow.
Right. So one thing that if you passed your license, then there's only 3 elements required for contract: people, price, location. So earnest money deposit, or this section here, is not a requirement.
How about that?
To bind the contract.
All right.
People assume that's true. Now, if, let's say you put $2,000 and it says within 3 days after effective date, and the buyer has not remitted their earnest money deposit, it doesn't mean that the contract is null and void. It just means the seller has a right to declare the buyer in breach for failing to abide by one of the terms. So that is a common question I get.
So in your idea, in your thinking, we really want to, if we're working with the buyer, we're putting forward this offer. We want to make sure that we're protecting the buyer's earnest money, correct?
If you're representing the buyer.
If we're representing the buyer.
Correct.
And so really looking in terms of what is the least amount to show seriousness, that this is an offer in earnest. This
Right.
is a good faith offer. One of the questions I have is when we come to line 30, there are 2 options. One is the earnest money can accompany the offer, which means they write a check and you don't know if it's accepted or not. Here's the offer and here's the earnest money. The other is to be made within one of these defaults.
Mm-hmm.
If it's blank, it's 3 days. Fill it in. Don't leave that. And sometimes you might need to put 5 days if they're out of the area, and it might be difficult for them to get. My recommendation is never check the first box.
Yeah, so the first box, obviously, somebody's handwriting out a check. They don't know if the offer is going to be accepted, countered. They don't know if they're going to counter on the price. So it's kind of arcane.
Yeah.
Plus, with wiring, most of the time it goes under contract. We will wire or send wiring instructions to the buyer to just wire us their earnest money deposit. So
Perfect.
That's the more traditional, safer route to go. Less, I always call it, non-income producing work to do.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes you'll get somebody who's down on vacation again. And they're like, listen, we are not going to be back home to send wires for 5 days. We just want to give you a check now. So it's not uncommon to have something like that happen.
What are the potential pitfalls for, as the agent, taking hold of that earnest money check and being the courier to the title company themselves?
Probably just losing it.
Yeah. They're responsible for that money. And that's part of your fiduciary duties, is that you will give skill care and you'll give a full accounting. But my recommendation is don't do it. Have them go directly to the title company with either that check or the wiring or what have you. It's best that you're not running around holding on to that. You might forget about it, and there are laws about how soon that has to be deposited. Just don't play in that game.
Correct, because as a closing company, as soon as we receive the earnest money deposit check, we will send an email to the listing agent and buyer's agent. We've received and deposited the earnest money, which you need for your file.
Yeah.
And another thing on the amount. So a common question I get, especially with new agents, I don't know how much we should put in as a deposit. And kind of you touched upon this, but it's all relative. There is no black and white rule. If it's $1 million property and somebody's trying to do a $500 earnest money deposit, it's a red flag to the seller that these buyers are not strong. Or they're maybe putting in multiple offers places just to tie them up so they can decide which one they want to buy. Whereas on the flip side, if you're representing the seller, you get an offer that comes in with low earnest money deposit, kind of tells you this may not be the strongest buyer. They may tie our property up for 30, 45 days. At the end of it, if the buyer decides I'm going to walk, the most the seller would get is the $500 earnest money deposit. So as a listing agent, you want to have a conversation before you ever get an offer.
Yeah.
All right, your house is $1 million. I should expect earnest money to be $10,000, $20,000. If they can't do that, then they probably don't have the ability to purchase the property. So consider those as maybe red flags for how the transaction is going to go if your seller accepts.
So once again, there's not a rule. There are customs. A lot of times you'll hear 1% rule.
Right.
But it's once again, what do I need to do to convey serious buyer? Okay. So in that, we look at that amount, and that's going to be line 30 or 29 and 30 to be accompanied. Go ahead and fill it in with 3 unless you need a few more days than that. And then escrow agent name, which people get confused. Escrow agent and title company. Are those the same or?
They're not the same in the contract. So you can have an escrow company actually hold the earnest money while another title company is actually handling the closing. It's not efficient. And some companies may say, I refuse to hold the EMD check unless we're doing the closing. So just be aware. I don't know why when they created this contract, they just didn't put escrow agent Mark A. Violet PA on all the contracts, but they left it blank for some reason.
So within that though, that's where you are both escrow agent and title company. Y'all function as both.
Correct.
And so somebody would put in there Mark A. Violet PA. Correct. And address, it's important to go ahead and put your address in there.
Correct.
Now, does that mean that somebody has to come to your address to close?
No. So my office, the contract will say that the property shall be closed in the county where the property is located. So let's say my office is in Okaloosa County, but the closing is in Santa Rosa County. I will go to Santa Rosa County and do the closing. So I will conduct the closing in the county where the property is located.
Yep. All right. Perfect. And so Mark A. Violet PA. Now they don't have to use you. I recommend they use you.
Me too.
And so address is going to be.
Yeah, I mean, I have multiple offices, but I'm at the Destin office. So, and all this you can pull from my website. A lot of times, just depending on where the closing is located.
Perfect.
But so, I mean, the rest of it should be pretty simple. Phone number, email address, fax number. If you don't have that, you can always just go to my website. It's all there.
Yeah, markavioletpa.com. All right, so additional deposit to be delivered to escrow agent. This is line 36 and line 37. So what does this mean?
So usually in residential contracts, that's never even used. The theory for this line is, let's say there's a long distance between I want to be under contract, I have a long due diligence period. The seller may say, okay, fine, I'll give you 60 days due diligence. You can put $500 down. But once the 60 days runs, I want another $5,000 or something like that.
Yeah. And sometimes that is a way of kind of protecting. I will put down half of that amount. Once we get past inspection period, we'll put down more. And it could show, it could protect your agent on the beginning front side of it on some levels, but it also could just show the seriousness. We're willing to put down $5,000. And after we get through inspection, we'll put down another $5,000 as long as. So like you said, it's rarely used, but it could be used strategically to strengthen an offer by saying, we'll do a little bit more after we reach these hurdles or what have you. So 99% of the time, you'll never use that. All right. So within that, once again, if left blank, then 10. If you're going to go with 10, 15, handwrite it in or put that in on DocuSign. All right, financing expresses a dollar amount or percentage. How important is this?
I really wish they would get rid of the or percentage part,
Mm-hmm.
because if you put 500,000 purchase price, 400,000 financing, I can see 5 minus 4 should be 100,000.
Right.
If you do 80% and then don't leave a balance to close amount because you left it blank, and I can't read what the purchase price is, I have no idea what the purchase price is. So if you convert everything to a dollar amount and it's hard to read, that just helps confirm what the parties agreed on.
Yeah. So best practice is, but up there on line 27 is your purchase price. Then you would take your earnest money deposit. Now keep in mind the financing amount. If they are on a 20% down, it's 20% of the total purchase price, not the 20% after the earnest money deposit. So 500,000, 20% of that would be 100,000. So in that, financing would be as a number of $400,000. And so anything else that the other, what could that other be?
Maybe a second mortgage.
All right.
Yeah, you're going to do 80-10 or 80-20 or
80-10-10, something
like
to that.
Yeah.
So basically, this last line on line 42 is where you add it all up. And so it should be sales price minus earnest price minus the loan amount. That's how much they have to show up with at closing.
Plus closing cost.
Plus closing cost. That's important. Say that again.
Plus the closing cost. Yeah.
So your client needs to understand that that's the balance to purchase. There will be other expenses on the closing, and those are your prepaids, those are your taxes, those are your closing costs,
Right.
Everything that roll into that.
And the main thing when you're going over this, and the buyers may or may not remember, is to have a conversation with them that they will have to wire the funds. Wells Fargo has certain types of accounts. One of them only lets them wire, I think it's like $1,000 per day.
Mm-hmm.
And the day before closing is not the day to figure out we can't wire more than $1,000 when they owe $350,000.
Yeah.
So please have a conversation with the buyers. We used to take certified checks, but all the fraudsters out there have figured out how to create fake certified checks. So now it must be anything over $500 in closing costs must be by wire.
How about that? Now, to protect against wire fraud, always make sure that if that they're verifying before they transfer that everything is up and up, because scammers have known how to get into your email account or the buyer's email account, watch and wait, and then right about the time of closing, they send out their own wiring instructions. Right?
Yeah, the most important thing, I mean, you could attempt to explain to your buyer all the different types of frauds, but the more important thing is tell them before they wire the funds, call the closing company, and verbally just verify. That's the safest way.
There we go. All right. Anything else in this section 2 that we need to address?
Nope, covers it.
All right, y'all. Now you've completed section 2. It's the money part. All right. Now we start diving more into the terms. All right. So congratulations. You finished section 2. Next video, we're going to dive into section 3.